make a mistake, you realize that, oh, I made a mistake, and you get very tense. I see that all the time. Please, please, please. You need to focus on grammar. You need to focus on vocabulary. You guys use the sound a lot, like yalla habibi. Oh my God. I have to push them and kick them and scare them and blackmail them and encourage them and do whatever I can to make sure that... Hey, welcome to today's video. I'm Alex from Zoom English. As always, your favorite PTE preparation channel. Today, I'm going to talk about something very important, especially if you're from one of these or these or these or these or these or these or these countries. So if that's you, this video is going to be very handy. And if for some reason we missed you, comment which place you're from, and I'm going to make a separate video just for you. So we made a video a couple of years back about what you should focus on specifically, depending on the country you're from. And you can find the video here, but we decided to make an updated version with the 2022 PTE exam pattern. What are the areas of focus? What are the areas of weakness? So we've had thousands of students. I personally taught more than 3,000 students from all countries all around the world. I think in total, we got more than 60, 70 countries. And I noticed that the areas they're lacking in are not the same. Obviously, some people speak in a certain way. Other countries focus a lot on grammar. Some other countries, maybe they struggle with their listening skill, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Let's get right into it. And if you want to skip straight to your country, you can see down here at what minute it is. You can just click on the chapter and go straight to your favorite place. Let's get started. Number one, India and Pakistan. If you're from those places, I know maybe the relationship between your country is not always that great, but the truth is your culture is very similar. The education system is very similar. There's a lot of shared things, including the language, Urdu and Hindi, or if you speak any other language. So I'm going to group them together. But for India and Pakistan, I'm going to split it up into two categories. We got the students that I get that are in IT, in technical fields to programming and development and stuff like that, and non-IT fields. The students I noticed from India and Pakistan that are in IT, usually very organized, very intelligent, but also very busy. The good thing is that these individuals, they work with a lot of technical slang. You probably read a lot of manuals. You have to deal with upper management. You deal with your customers from overseas in English. So the good thing is the logic and the vocabulary tends to be there. So if you're in IT, usually questions like reorder paragraphs are quite easy for you because it's very logical. And oftentimes in fill in the blanks, for example, you may know some of the difficult vocabulary, but most of the students that I get from IT fields, they really struggle with speaking. And I know sometimes maybe as a computer engineer, software engineer, you get so used to looking in the screen for 12, 14 hours a day that we don't get to maybe interact as much and talk as much. So speaking is an issue. So what I would focus on specifically is number one, your oral fluency in speaking. That means you have to read nonstop. You can't be second guessing yourself. You can't be doubting yourself. And I know you're probably very intelligent. So when you make a mistake, you realize that, oh, I made a mistake, and you get very tense. I see that all the time. It's fine. But you need to just relax. And remember, no matter what, in speaking specifically, just keep talking. For describe, image, and retell lecture, memorize your formats. Make sure you know them by heart. But typically, read aloud is the one that you should focus on the most. Writing section, I know you guys are usually very organized. You're good at typing. Writing the essay, the summaries, that's not an issue. In reading, reorder paragraphs are not an issue. But if you've only started studying English fairly recently, like in uni, for example, you should still focus on the grammar. That's something we cover in the class. And you should focus on a lot of the repeated questions that come in the exam that students practice in our practice platform, for example. Because when you see language and vocabulary from areas that you're not familiar with, you will be well prepared to tackle that. And in the listening section, usually you tend to do quite well. It just comes down to practicing your dictation. Now, for India and Pakistani students that are not in IT fields, you're in another field like engineering or so on. Usually speaking tends to be much easier for you because probably you're not staring at the computer for 14 hours a day. Writing, sometimes we have mistakes with spelling and punctuation, but that's something that we can fix. But what I would urge you, please, 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 you need to focus on grammar. You need to focus on vocabulary. So that means for fill in the blanks, the drop downs with the 4 options, as well as the drag and drops, you really must practice at least 200-300 questions or more until you see the same pattern repeated again and again and again. Because what you'll notice, PTE focuses on a couple main topics like healthcare or government or education. So if you've encountered a couple questions from that particular field, you'll be more familiar with the vocabulary, and of course, you'll be more familiar with the grammar mistakes. So you still need to know the basics. You still need to memorize formats. But beyond that, you should spend most of your time on fill in the blanks in the reading and write from dictation. And you should have a qualified trainer or somebody you trust who has really good English to check your grammar and punctuation in the writing summaries, the essay, and the listening summaries. So that's it for India and Pakistan. Let's move on to country number 2. Hello, Dhanyavad to all my Nepali students. I love you guys. As always, I get a lot of Nepali students. I've eaten a lot of momos from my successful students and a lot of dumplings. So I'm quite familiar with the weak areas. To generalize it a little bit, Nepali students tend to do quite well in speaking, like read aloud, describe image, and retell lecture, but repeat sentences are tough. So you should definitely spend a lot of your time on repeat sentences. Writing summaries, the essay, that part is okay, but definitely fill in the blanks and definitely reorder paragraphs. And I've noticed this with both students that are from government schools and from non-government schools. Vocabulary tends to be an issue. Grammar tends to be an issue. So again, there's going to be extra resources we have on our platform that you have on our YouTube page as well that we'll link to. But please spend a lot of your time on filling the blanks. And last but not least, write from dictation. That's very, very, very important. Because in dictation, what tends to happen is you tend to catch a lot of the words, but you tend to miss some little prepositions, some little articles in between. And because of that, the score is affected quite a bit. So if you hear the 8 or 7 big words, but you missed 3, 4 articles and prepositions, nowadays, with the marking that they have in place, the score is going to be affected a lot. So you need to be able to grammatically check your sentences as well. And I'll make another video about that as well, of how you can check your answer to make sure that you can add something extra, even if you didn't hear it. So for countries number 3 and 4, I'm going to group them together because again, it's a similar culture and there's a lot of similar mistakes that students tend to make. Specifically, those countries are Colombia and Brazil. And I'll include other Spanish-speaking countries in South America like Peru, Venezuela, and Chile, and so on. Students I get from Colombia and Brazil, again, I love you guys. You're very energetic, you're very social, you're very easy to get along with. That's great. But when it comes to the PTE exam, because you're so social and maybe you speak so fast in your native languages, whenever you get to the speaking section, specifically the read aloud, that's usually a big, big area of focus that you need to work on. And the main thing I would suggest is practicing with one of the tools or one of the websites that we recommended previously or on our platform for questions like read aloud to see your accuracy, how clearly you say the words. Are you missing S and ED? Because often Spanish and Portuguese speakers, they tend to group the words together. And instead of saying, hello, how are you? It's like, hello, how are you? Hola, ¿cómo estás? You can't do this in English. Because what happens with the system in the read aloud section specifically, if you start to group things together and your speed is inconsistent, oftentimes the computer, the software loses track of where you are. So you may have spoken fast just for 3, 4 words and the computer lost you and it cannot catch up until the end of a sentence. So because of that, you're often failing speaking and it's also affecting your reading section. So please focus a lot on your read alouds. Number 2 is your repeat sentences. Again, I know in your culture, you're used to listening to people and looking them in the eyes and more of a social interaction. So whenever you hear like a weird accent or like an unfamiliar topic, again, you tend to speak the right words sometimes. But in repeat sentences, you tend to completely swap the sequence or totally like panic and mess up the whole sentence. So you really need to know what to do in that situation. So I'd suggest practicing at least 20, 30 sentences in repeat sentences every day. And make sure you're not focusing on the whole sentence, but try to at least get like 5 or 6 words without any mistakes. Okay, so that's what I suggest for you guys. Describe image and retell lecture usually is okay, but memorizing the essay format, oh my God. My South American students, I have to push them and kick them and scare them and blackmail them and encourage them and do whatever I can to make sure they memorize the essay formats. So if you have to, get the essay format on day 1, cram it. I would suggest even to record yourself reading it and just re-listen to it every single day because you guys are very auditory. So you memorize better by either doing it with your hands typically or by listening, by hearing. So you can either write it out in lines, line by line, memorize it phrase by phrase, or you can just record yourself in WhatsApp and re-listen to it on your commute to work, on your train ride home, and so on. Next, we got fill in the blanks. Again, that's kind of a mixed bag. Fill in the blanks, I recommend to everybody to practice, but both the reading and writing, technically, when it comes to grammar, if you didn't study English till later in your life, definitely practice that. Make sure you've done at least 200-300 before going for the real exam. And last but not least, write from dictation. A lot of South American students And I noticed that especially if you're in Australia, you tend to stick in your community. You tend to talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend or wife or husband at home in Spanish. You tend to hang out at Brazilian parties with your Brazilian friends and speak Portuguese. And you maybe only talk in English at work sometimes, which is very specific to your field. So please, when it comes to dictations, wherever you're practicing from, or you can check out some of the videos we posted on our page with all of the dictations in PTE for free, plug it in, re-listen to them every single day and read the text at the same time. So you get really familiar with like understanding the accent and the words and seeing it spelled out at the same time. That's it for my South American students. Now, on to the next one. If you are from Nigeria or some of the other surrounding countries, let's exclude the Arabic-speaking countries like Egypt, but mostly kind of the sub-Saharan countries and so on. I personally love getting Nigerian students. So if you're one of them, honestly, this is a piece of cake for every single thing except the speaking section. You guys, especially from Nigeria, you speak English your whole life. You listen to English your whole life. You read English, you watch TV in English. Your vocabulary, your grammar, your listening skill is excellent. Don't get discouraged. But what many of you struggle with is the speaking section. You guys sometimes tend to speak in a certain way, which is kind of with a very thick accent. So there's different techniques that we practice in the class to make it a bit more neutral so the computer can digest it better. Second thing is your volume. You have to be loud, you have to be clear. That's very important. You have to memorize formats, you have to work on your consistency. So please focus the most on speaking. If you are discouraged with your past exam scores, I've had countless students from Nigeria that went from 30s and 40s in speaking to 70s and 80s and even 90 out of 90. So please don't get discouraged. You can always send us a message with just your voice sample and we'll give you free advice on what are some little tweaks that you can do and try by yourself as well. On to the next country, the next group of students. You are my students from the, can I get a drum roll? Philippines. I love the Philippines. I've been to Philippines 6-7 times. I have a lot of Filipino friends. I love your culture. I love your people. So I'm happy to have Filipino students in my class. For Filipino students, oftentimes you work really hard or you're overseas and it's really hard to find time to study. Honestly, I could stand here and try to sell you and take my class and pay the money, but in reality, you don't really need that. What you need is you need to understand how the exam works. You need to understand how the structure works and how the marking works. And of course, you need to give the time to your practice every single day. So if you are from the Philippines, you usually tend to have amazing listening skills. So repeat sentences and dictations are not an issue. You usually tend to have pretty good grammar, pretty good vocabulary. So it's just about memorizing a few things, understanding the structure, and giving at least 30-40 minutes a day for practice. If you do this, I promise you don't need some guru on the internet to tell you that your English is really bad. You just need to have the right guidance, the right strategies, but you guys can usually clear this exam very, very easily. Let's go to the next country, and I would call it more a region. That would be the Arabic-speaking population. If you're from Egypt or the Middle East specifically, I had students from Iraq, I had students from Iran or Afghanistan, I had students from Kuwait, Qatar, a lot of students from UAE. So if you're in that area, again, what I suggest is speaking, clarity has to be there. Students that speak Arabic sometimes tend to have a really strong accent, and you guys use your throat a lot, like the sound when you, like Habib, you guys use the sound a lot, like Yalla Habibi. So when it comes to speaking, there's a couple of things we need to tweak when it comes to your tone, to how you speak, the pace, the speed, the flow, and things like that. Memorizing, usually quite easy. Writing, usually quite easy. But again, I'd urge you to focus a lot on your reorder paragraphs and fill in the blanks. So if you focus on those areas and you just need a couple of little tweaks and adjustments in speaking, you guys also can do quite well. I suggest spending an hour a day for practice, 30-40 minutes for the reading section, and the rest I'd be focusing mostly on speaking. Last but not least, if you are a student from China or Hong Kong or Macau, or if you're just a Mandarin speaker in general, you might be living in Malaysia, you might be living in Singapore. The easy thing, the great thing with your education system, you guys focus on grammar a lot. All the students I get that speak Mandarin or speak Cantonese, their grammar is better than mine sometimes, which is great. Vocabulary, again, the tougher words, maybe sometimes you don't know, but I know that you guys have great work ethic. You work hard, you're willing to put in the practice. You're gonna spend an hour per day practicing fill in the blanks until you're familiar with that area. Memorizing, I know you'll memorize, you'll do whatever you have to. But with my Mandarin and Cantonese speaking students, we always need to work on speaking. Chinese speakers have a very specific way of saying, they don't say thank you, they say thank you. There's a lot of other little pronunciations in speaking that we need to work on. Mostly comes down to finding a balance between how clear you are and how fluent you are. Because you often focus too much on clarity and saying everything correctly because you're conscious about your speaking, but you're sacrificing fluency. Or you are focusing too much on fluency, but then the clarity goes down the drain. So you need to always have somebody maybe that listens to how you speak and again gives you like little tweaks, because practicing on a lot of online websites, it's going to vary depending on the country you're from. So if you're practicing on some websites that are not for Chinese speakers or there's no human interaction, it shows you a good score, but when you go to the exam, the score is not really the same. I know you guys will put in the hard work. You might need to practice a little bit for your vocabulary, but mostly need to focus on adjustments and speaking in a certain way in your speaking section. So guys, this is it for today's video. Please like and subscribe if this was helpful. If you're from another country that I haven't mentioned, comment it below and I'll make another video talking about your areas of weakness if I have students from those places. And if you want to see any other content, comment below of what you want me to focus on more. We can always take each country one by one and go in more detail rather than talking about it for just 30, 60 seconds. Until next time, this is Alex. I hope you're having a lovely day. See you.